campers. We are back outside. This might look a little familiar to you if you're used to Calgary. I am actually just above Nose Creek, so where I was talking to you about fish and insects. Now I am up top this isn't a natural forest. This is a forest that has been put in, but everything that lives here are plants and trees that are native to Alberta and this area. And I just want to show you, because when you're camping, it's important to know what's around you, because some of the plants and trees are really good for you. Some of them can be used to help you when you're not feeling well, that kind of thing. But some of them can also make you sick. And then some are also really good for if you need emergency shelters or to start a fire or something like that. So the first one I want to show you is these tall, trembling ones that are behind me. These are some of my favorite trees. These are called a trembling aspen, or a poplar aspen is another name for them. They're the ones that if you close your eyes on a windy day in a parkland or a prairie, it makes it sound like water. And the way that you can identify these is they tend to grow really tall and narrow, but their leaves are kind of stumpy and almost like a pointed heart shape. And I'm going to show you a couple other plants that are a little bit different. So this is the trembling aspen, and they're really important too. Remember we were talking about yesterday about species that tell us about the health or something? Well, aspens are really important for parklands. And believe it or not, every one of these that are growing here are actually from one tree. They kind of grow in a fun way. But those are aspens. So now, I'm going to make my cameraman run. We're going to walk over here to this other part of the forest, and I'm going to show you a whole bunch of different types of trees in the same place. Okay, so you might think, oh, Christmas trees, and you're right. But this particular kind of tree, it's really tall and straight. This is a young one. This one will get really, really tall. This is called a lodgepole pine pole because it's got this really tall center thing. You can tell it's a pine because it's got these really long needles. Okay, and these are called needles. And at the end of the needles, some of them are just starting to form here, and some of them are more here, are the cones. Now these aren't called pine cones. That's where we get the name from. But this kind of tree is called a conifer because it does grow cones, and those are really important. They actually hold the seeds inside. So a pine tree has the really long needles. They only poke kind of if you go against them, but you can go one way and they're kind of soft. And then they have the cones at the end versus this one over here. This is actually a white spruce. The needles are a lot shorter. You can see they're a lot shorter. They're white on the tips, and then when you get further back into the tree, they're green. And you can't really see any cones on this one yet. It's too early in the year. But the cones, you can kind of see evidence of old ones. The cones on a spruce grow underneath. They don't grow on the tips. They kind of grow underneath, and they tend to grow in the branch joints at the back. So this is a spruce, and there's lots of different spruce in Alberta, but the spruce are they're a lot pokier. Like, it really doesn't matter how you grab this one. It kind of hurts. So spruce have thicker, shorter, pokier needles. Now this one, this has leaves. And so the difference between a cone type tree or a conifer and a tree with leaves like this is these leaves actually drop in the fall and gives the trees a chance to rest. The pines, that's their leaves, and they just grow all the time. So this is a willow, okay? And I'll show you here, I was showing you, there's our trembling aspen, and there's our willow. So the willow is really, really, really long and thin, and it's a much darker green. And willows, you can kind of see, they almost have like a palm tree look to them. And they go back, and willows are really important. The willow bark is where aspirin comes from. And it was our First Nations people that taught us that it was the willow bark that helps with headaches and heart and that kind of thing. So willows are actually really, really important. And then the other one, oh yeah, right behind me. This is a poplar. And this is kind of tricky because if you look at the aspen, it's similar. The poplar is similar, but the poplar is actually a little bit longer. And it's got these ridged edges. Okay, so this is a poplar, and the leaves in the spring tend to get really sticky. Those are the trees that like all of the white fluff comes from and makes everybody really sneezy and itchy. So that's a poplar. And then the last tree we want to show you is around the corner in a different part of the forest. So we're going to go for a walk. Okay, so here we are in a different part of our forest, just kind of around the corner. And I bet you're going to tell me this is a conifer, like a pine tree or a spruce tree. And unfortunately, you'd be wrong. Okay, these are really cool trees. They are a larch, sometimes called a tamarack tree. I just learned that today. But larches, if you come look, they have what look like needles, but when you touch them, they're actually really soft and almost rubbery and feathery. And they grow in clumps coming off. When we were looking at the spruce trees and the pine trees, each needle came off in its own place. So larches or tamaracks, they all come off kind of in clumps. They're really soft, and these go an amazing golden yellow in the fall, and they lose all their leaves because these are actually tiny, tiny leaves. So these are the deciduous trees, or trees like the aspen and the birch and the poplar I was telling you about, because they actually lose these tiny little leaves. But this lets them grow in places with like little bits of moisture and lower sun and that kind of thing. And they're really important to the Rocky Mountains, and they grow in the Rocky Mountains. And you can tell it's fall when these start turning yellow and gold. So that is a larch, and they're absolutely lovely. And I've got two more I want to show you, but you're gonna have to come and zoom in on my piece of paper here. These are important because we live in Alberta, and they are edible, but because you're camping, we have to be careful of wildlife. And these are two kinds of plants that bears absolutely love. And so I can't find any right here, so I'm just going to show you on a picture. So the first one, this is one of my favorite wild plants. This is a wild strawberry. And yes, strawberries grow wild in Alberta. And this would almost be real size for the leaves. They're tiny, tiny. And this is normally really red, and you can normally see them because you'll see all of these little lines going out like this with red. And when they're about to bloom, they get tiny little white flowers, and then you get itty bitty 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 super sweet strawberries. So that's a strawberry, but again, bears like them. And then this other one is down in the corner, and again, this is almost life size. It grows on the ground. It'll grow under pine trees and spruce trees in the shade. It'll grow on rocks. It doesn't need a whole lot of dirt. It's called kinnikinnick. That's its original First Nations name. Some people call it bearberry because it gets these tiny little red berries that grows under it. And bears absolutely love this. And it's these tiny little stumpy leaves on these really thick woody branches, kind of grow out like the strawberries in these long lines. But it's called kinnikinnick or bearberry. And that's, again, really important if you're out and about hiking and camping, because where these are, a lot of time there are bears. And when we get back to kind of my cabin, I'm going to show you some tracks that you can look for, because I can't find them right now. It's too hot and there's no animal tracks out. So we're going to have to go look at them on paper. Hey campers, we are back at my cabin. We'll call it that for now. And I want to show you a couple things, and it is on paper, because as I explained when we were out in the forest, that with how hot it is right now, I can't really find any tracks. But I want to show you a couple things about animal tracks that are handy when you're camping. And also just to remind you that if you're going out looking for animal tracks, as fun as that is and as unique as they are, it's kind of that whole God's fingerprints are everywhere thing, and animal tracks are like fingerprints. You really should have an adult with you, and preferably an experienced adult, because tracking can be dangerous, but it can also be a lot of fun. Okay, so here is pictures of not even close to half of the tracks that you could find in and around our area. But I've highlighted some of the ones in orange just to show you a couple different things. Now, these are drawings of the tracks, but there's some important differences. So when you're out looking and you see a track that kind of looks like this or this or this, they almost have like a heart shape to them, and they tend to be side by side. That is typically a plant eater, like a moose or a sheep or a deer. We even have some bison or buffalo in the province, so you might find those. So those are plant eaters, and those are typically pretty safe to find. You do want to be careful, because where there are plant eaters, there are meat eaters. And then the other ones you can see, these ones that tend to have these little tiny tips on them, here and here and here, those, and over here, those tend to be our predators or our meat eaters, and those are their claws for grabbing and that kind of thing. And so you want to be careful, but you can also see that they tend to look like really spread out, almost like a hand or a real foot. So that is something to keep an eye out for, and we'll look a little bit closer at those in a minute. And then you can see these ones that really, I don't know, look like planes almost, or fingers. They tend to be really, really small. These are not to scale at all, which what that means is that there's no way that these look like this. A lot of them, like say for the example, this quail one would actually be really tiny. These are birds, and so birds tend to look like sticks, and they also don't press very deep down into either the dirt or the snow in the winter or whatever. And that's the other thing about tracking, is that typically you need some kind of soft ground for the track to show up. So a little bit closer for a couple of these. Oh, and then this fun one here. This is a rabbit, and rabbits have long front feet and tiny little back feet, and they don't really have much because they're padded, so they don't make any noise. So a couple things that I really want to point out, especially if you're camping. For example, this is a coyote paw print. They tend to be more, they're bigger than that. One print will be like that big, just one paw. So their paws are huge. So it'd be like, right, kind of like that, and then the paws out here. So coyote prints are big, and that's really bad drawing, but that shows you how big they are. But they're very similar to dog prints, because a coyote is a type of dog. It's a wild dog. So when you're out and about camping in particular, if you see something that looks like this or like this, be really, really careful, because you don't know if it's a dog, someone just out hiking with their human, or if it's coyote, or if they're really big, and by really big I mean like my hand size big, that can be a wolf. So be really careful. The other one when you're camping that you need to be really careful for are these ones. These are grizzly bear paw prints. And this says here 13.5 inches long. So what that means is that from front to back, sometimes those paw prints can be like bigger than this ruler, because this is a 12-inch ruler. Okay, so from here to here. So a grizzly bear paw print is huge, and they can be really, really wide. Okay, so like a grizzly bear paw could actually cover this whole piece of paper. So when you're out, and that's the front, the back one tends to be a little bit, it's actually even longer. So when you're out and you see really wide, really long prints, with the claws way up at the top, that's a bear. And you want to be careful, especially when we're around like that bearberry and strawberries. So one last one that I want to show you, because we were talking about fish and where the fish live and insects and whatever, is our beaver. It looks like kind of like our carnivores or our meat eaters. And it's got long, thin fingers, kind of like our birds. But really, if you remember from when we were talking about our food webs, beavers only eat plants. But what you can see here, these tiny little pieces, is webbing. And webbing is like this little bit here between your fingers. And in things that live in the water or near the water that need to swim, that webbing is just some skin that can fold out of the way and come open, and that lets the beaver swim. And it also looks like claws, but those claws aren't used for hunting things. They're used for like gripping wood and holding on to the plants that they're eating and that kind of thing. So there's a beaver. And again, beavers are important because they build dams and they eat and everything else. So kind of like our own fingerprints. They're all a little bit different, and all of these paw prints or tracks are all a little bit different and just show so much more of the creation. And one last thing, I think you can figure this one out. The direction that the animal is traveling is always where the toes are pointing forward. So even when you see these kind of tracks, you can tell because the pointy parts are at the front, and so that also tells you the direction that they're traveling.